Hello friends, this is Doug Schaible and welcome to the Premature Bible Institute. Glad you're with us tonight, and just pray that what we'll do is we'll have a good discussion about some things that there isn't a lot of scripture written about, but there is some, and we want to talk about that. But last week, if you remember right, we talked about how God in eternity past, he existed, he dwelt there, he was by himself, but he was content and satisfied just as he was. Well, this week we're going to start talking about the creation. Well, let me put it this way. We don't know exactly when this event happened, but we're going to talk about it, not like it did happen first, but at least we're going to talk about this particular subject, because whether it happened at this particular point or a little bit later, it really isn't that relevant, except for a couple of scriptures, and we'll talk about that. But we're going to talk about the creation of the spirit world. And so in the beginning, as we know, before the beginning, let's put it that way, there wasn't anything but God. And God existed by himself, content and satisfied as he was for all eternity, had no needs, had no desire for anything else. But there was a point where he came and he decided that he wanted to share what he had with something else. So we're going to talk tonight about the creation of the spirit world. And like I said, this isn't necessarily put in order of chronological order or order of importance. It's just a matter we're going to talk about it first because it has to be talked about at some point. So we're going to talk about how he created the spirit beings. And remember, like I said, he's under no compulsion to do so. He decided to create. It wasn't that anything else thought that God needed to create something. God himself decided to create. And he did so out of his own desire to do so, and for no other reason. Now, when God decides to create, like I said, he decides to create. And there's a couple scriptures here. John 1:3 says this: all things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. So there isn't anything that exists that wasn't made in the beginning by God. Now, I'm not talking about things that are made today or things that we see coming in, like me, for instance. I know I wasn't made back in the beginning, but the idea of mankind being made was back at the beginning. The creation of the spirit world was at the beginning. The creation of the physical world was at the beginning. And so he decided to create. It wasn't anything else. And everything was made by him and through him. Nothing else. And of all the spirits that were created, he created every single one of them. There weren't any that were created after he created them. There were none created before he created them. He created them when he did, and they were all created by him. Nehemiah 9:6 says this: you alone are the Lord. You have made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host. Now that could mean the stars and everything in it, but it also means everything, like it said in the verse before. There isn't anything that was made that he didn't make. With all their hosts, the earth and everything on it, the seas and all that is in them, and you preserve them all. In other words, God sustains them. The host of heaven worships you. And so there we're talking about all the angelic beings. The host of heaven worships you. So they were created in the beginning by God. Now, like I'm going to say, I'm going to talk a little bit here about when they were created. There's no real absolute definite or definitive answer to when they were created, whether they were created right before the beginning or right after the beginning. We know for sure that they were around before man was created. We do know that. But there are some scriptures that indicate that they could have been, and I think more than likely, and I really believe this in myself, that they were created before the beginning. And or before the beginning of the created world. And here's why. In Job 38, there's 7 verses there where God is talking to Job. And he's talking to Job and confronting him about some issues. And so you'll find out, God does things a lot rhetorically. He says things in a way that is meant to have no other answer to it other than the one that he's providing in the question itself. Most likely, I think that they were created before the beginning. Here's why. And it says this, the Lord says to Job, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? In other words, who measured it all? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. So it says when the morning stars sang together. In other words, when all the angelic beings were just awestruck at what they saw, and all the sons of God shouted for joy, when he's talking about when he created the physical world. So that's the best indication, I think, that we have that they were around before the beginning or before the creation of the physical world. But in any event, some people have different opinion. I'm not going to hold that against them or for them. I just think my opinion is they were there before everything, and they were just blown away with every day of creation. God was in there. So he created all of these spirits. Let's get back to that subject. He created all of these spirits. And in the spirits, in the spirit world, there are basically four categories of spiritual beings. One is angels. There's archangels that were referred to, cherubim and seraphim. The cherubim and seraphim look quite different than angels. The angels always tend to reveal themselves in human form, or they look like, whenever they're presented, they always present themselves in human form, so they look like us. But the cherubim and seraphim look very different. They have many wings and eyes and faces, and very either terrible looking for its beauty or whatever, but they do look different. But in any event, all of them are there, and they're there for a purpose, and he's creating them to serve him. Not because he needs them. God is all-powerful, has no needs, but he's creating them because he wants to, and that's what he's trying to do. He wants to share who he is with something else that's been created. So, and another thing here is he created all of the angels perfect. Every single one of them would be created perfect. And this is a very, very important thing to sit down and consider and to think through. Because if God would have created anything imperfect, then by nature there would be a flaw in God himself. And God can only act in a way that is consistent with who he is. And if God is perfect, then everything he does is perfect. And it will be perfect. So he created all the spirits perfect. In Deuteronomy 32:4, it says this: he is the rock. His way or his work is perfect. So that's what it says about him. In 2 Samuel 22:31, it says this: as for God, his way is perfect. So there's no flaw. There's no argument about whether God did things right or not. So he created the spirits to serve him, and he wanted them to, like I said, to serve him, not because he needed them, needed their help, or because he's even given the spirits their ability to exist. So they can't even exist unless God allows them to. So he is giving them that opportunity to work with him, and he's letting them serve him in a way that is not only glorifying to God, but it's beneficial to the angels too. So Psalm 103 verses 20 and 21 says this: bless the Lord, you his angels, who excel in strength, who do his word, heeding the voice of his word. Bless the Lord, all you hosts, you ministers of his, who do his pleasure. So you can see it says they exceed in strength. They excel in strength. So they're very, very powerful beings. We don't know what that means, that kind of power, what they can do with all their abilities, but they have great ability to do things that we can't. Obviously, they can appear or not appear to us, not as they see fit, but as God wants them to see fit to do that. So, but they heed the voice of his word, and they serve him. They minister to him. They do things for him, because he's given them the honor to do that also. Now, he created them, like I said, with great wisdom and beauty also. He gave them very, very beautiful ones. And we'll talk about that a little bit more with one specific angel here before, or one angelic being, one spiritual being before too long, and talk about the beauty of that particular angel. But we'll do that in another lesson. So he created them all with this great wisdom and beauty. And he created so many of them that you can't even number them. There's just that many. Revelation 5:11 says this: then I looked, and I heard the voice of many angels around the throne, the living creatures, and the elders. And the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000, and thousands of thousands. And basically the point is, there was just such a great multitude of those angels that no one had any idea how many there were. There's just an innumerable amount of angels. So, and there's just so many. But they reside with God in heaven. They dwell with Him. And we know this later on. We see a particular passage where there's a person who goes and he lays down to sleep at night, and he has a dream. And he says this, in Genesis 28, verse 12, and it's talking about Jacob. He says, "Then he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and its top reached to heaven. And there the angels of God were ascending and descending on it." So he could see this ladder, this stairway, this way of transporting back and forth, and he could see the angels ascending and descending. So they were going up to heaven, they were coming down from heaven. So that was pretty interesting how they did that. But there was one special being, and it isn't that he was better or more honorable than any other angel, but he was created different. There was something, he was marked specially, and his name was Lucifer. Now, in the scriptures, it refers to him as the anointed cherub. So that gives you an idea that he was given great responsibility and privilege. So in Ezekiel 28:14, it says, "You were the anointed cherub." So what he's saying there is that Lucifer had this great honor bestowed upon him, and great wisdom and strength were given to him, and we don't know all of his responsibilities in heaven, but it seems to be that he was kind of in charge of all of them, or at least had authority over them. And we find that from some other scriptures too. But anyway, so he was the anointed cherub. He was one that was specially marked for this position. But it also notice it says he wasn't an angel, he was a cherub. So yes, he was a spiritual being, but he was one of those special creatures that looked very different than all the other angels, the one with all the wings and faces and so on, and could fly around, had wings, like I said that. So, and it also says here that he says he was a covering cherub. Ezekiel 28:16, he says, "You are the anointed cherub who covers." Now, that has left a lot of speculation of what that means to speculate what does it mean to cover. And it kind of gives the idea that he was the one that guarded the holiness of God. Now, once again, we know that God doesn't need his holiness guarded. He doesn't need anybody's help to do that. He is holy. That's what he is by nature. But his responsibility was to protect that, to make sure that he was honored the way he should be, when probably in the angelic realm, at least in the beginning. So his job was to be that person, his representative, to just keep things in check, if you want to put it that way. Not that things were out of check, but just that whole idea. His purpose was to cover, to protect, just make sure that God's honor was protected. So, and what was his state of being when he was created? In other words, what was he like? What was his essential character? He says he was perfect, absolutely perfect. Lucifer in Ezekiel 28:12 says this, "You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty." So it says this about him, that he was created perfect, absolutely no flaw, nothing wrong with him. And in verse 15 it says this, "You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created." So God created him perfect, absolutely without flaw, blemish, anything. Now, that doesn't mean he had all the knowledge that God did. To be perfect does not mean you're omniscient or omnipotent or omnipresent. It just means that your essential character is perfect. It has no flaw in it. And so anyway, but that's one of those things that we're talking about. So this is the creation of the spirit world. We don't know all of what was going on in heaven at that particular time when he created those, but he was creating them and everything was there, and they were going to be the audience, if you want to put it that way, for when he was going to create. And so just want to say this here. This will be kind of the end for this. Next week we're going to deal a little bit more with this, because it's next week's lesson really is important, and we really need to sit down and think about this because it's important to understand these angels and what happened to them and where they're at and how they, well, not only how they came to being, which we learned in this lesson, God created them, but we need to understand the implications of next lesson. So With that being said, please feel free to share these with people. Have them subscribe to my podcast if you can, both the video and the audio if they want to. And they can search for it on YouTube just look up Doug Schaible, Schaible. And then on their podcast, audio podcast, just get on their favorite podcast app and just look for Premature Bible Institute, and they'll find it right there. So that being said, I just want to say thank you guys and appreciate you coming. And it's important. We know that these angels were perfect. They were created perfect. Why? Because God is perfect. And he created them with great wisdom because he has all the power that there is. He gave them great knowledge because he has all the knowledge that there is. So God created them as a reflection of who he is. And all of these things, everything that God does is a reflection of his nature and character. So remember that. Let's get back together next week for the next lesson. Thank you and have a good evening. Bye.